The Navy's decision to allow military chaplains to perform same-sex marriages lasted less than a month. On April 13th, the chief of chaplains, Rear Admiral Mark Tidd, sent a memo saying Navy chaplains could officiate at same-sex unions at naval bases in states where they're legal. The Navy Times reported those details Monday, and that outraged some Republicans and social conservatives. Yesterday, Admiral Tidd pulled an about-face. NBC News chief Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski has the latest from D.C. But the policy was out there for a month. Was this just a result, then, of the publicity?
Well, no, actually, what Mark Tidd did, the chief of Navy chaplains, is somewhat jumped the gun, because even though Congress has repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that repeal doesn't take effect as far as the U.S. military and the Pentagon are concerned until 60 days after the Secretary of Defense and essentially the President certify that all necessary steps have been taken for a smooth transition. And that includes the training of some, more than 2 million active Reserve and National Guard forces. But there's another problem here, too, in the interpretation, because many up in Congress thinks this flies in the face of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act by actually sanctioning same-sex marriages. And under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the way it's being implemented, they still would not recognize same-sex partners for the purposes of benefits in many cases. So it becomes very complicated from a legal standpoint, not to mention the timing of it.
So, for instance, there's a Missouri Congressman, Representative Todd Akin, who released a letter. It was signed by himself and 62 other Congress members, calling on the Secretary of Navy to obey the Defense of Marriage Act, which is undergoing its own legal challenges right now. But in states where same-sex marriage is already legal, what are military officials telling you about same-sex marriage on military bases?
You know, quite frankly, this is one of those pitfalls or difficulties in the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that Secretary of Defense Gates had predicted, and that's why he wanted that longer time frame from the time that the law was repealed until that repeal was actually implemented, because these are the things that have to be worked out, not only through training and the like, but going through the legal processes, because all the questions that remain about Don't Ask, Don't Tell are many, probably, which haven't even been raised yet. So that is one of the reasons this is going to be delayed, and that's one of the reasons that the chief of Navy chaplains had to rescind this order.
All right, Jim, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Let me bring in former United States Army Captain Jonathan Hopkins, now a spokesman for Outserve, and Peter Sprigg is a senior fellow for policy studies at the Family Research Council. Captain, let me begin with you. What's your reaction to Admiral Tidd having to reverse his decision about allowing same-sex marriage in Navy chapels?
Well, fundamentally, I think it came down to a decision, the right decision, just made at the wrong time. This sort of decision had to be made at the broader Pentagon level, because equality should be the same in the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, for example. Ultimately, it was the right policy because it respected freedom of religion. Nearly 10 religions support same-sex unions, while others do not. His guidance allowed chaplains to do as their religion and their own personal conscience saw fit. That is freedom of religion. That is how we support all our soldiers of all faiths out there as they serve our country.
Peter, I don't want to discuss the moral standing on homosexuality, but on a legal basis, on a practical social basis, where same-sex marriage is already legal, why shouldn't service members be allowed to marry in military chapels?
Well, because of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. The Federal Defense of Marriage Act, passed by overwhelming bipartisan majorities in 1996 and signed into law by President Clinton, declares that for all purposes under federal law, marriage is defined as the union of one man and one woman. However individual states may define it is irrelevant for purposes of federal law and the federal government. What's shocking here is that to have a federal employee, a federal official, declaring that the federal government will no longer obey federal law. This law is binding. The controversy is not an issue of timing. It's a question of obeying the law. And the Defense of Marriage Act is binding unless and until it is repealed. So I I think that's the fundamental issue here.
And when you're looking at all the changes that are taking place, the legal challenges that are being served on DOMA right now, and even the Justice Department saying the Obama administration has said it's no longer going to defend DOMA. Do you predict an end to that? Do you see an end to that? I know that your organization has been pretty clear that it does not want the end of DOMA, but do you predict that there will be the end to it?
No, I believe that DOMA will be upheld by the courts because it's already been upheld by several federal courts. And I do not believe that there are the votes in Congress to repeal DOMA. I believe that that this law will continue to defend marriage and protect traditional marriage at the federal level for many years to come.
Captain, what's the best argument that you make when you're in your official capacity for Outserve about making sure that gay and lesbian military members have the same rights, have the same access to the social institutions that everyone else does?
Listen, I was a company commander. I had nearly 200 troops. They came from every faith group. They're Protestant, Catholic, Muslim. Some were Wiccan or atheist. They all deserve and require religious and spiritual support. So the Defense of Marriage Act does not prohibit same-sex marriages. It just says the federal government doesn't recognize them. It allows states to recognize them. Generally, marriage is not a federal issue anyway. To have the federal government ban on military bases certain types of marriage would be like having the federal government ban certain types of baptism or giving communion to certain people. That does not fit with our tradition of freedom of religion.
Yeah, Captain, I appreciate your time. I'm going to cut short the conversation there. Peter, thank you as well. I appreciate you chiming in and joining us.